Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. More than 500 people have been killed in the Myanmar junta's brutal crackdown on protests against its coup. Meanwhile, activists across the country have launched a civil disobedience campaign to hurl garbage onto streets. And Myanmar's advisory council has labeled the military as a terrorist group that should face international court. China has approved a sweeping overhaul of Hong Kong's electoral system. The new reforms concern the method for selection of Hong Kong's chief executive, legislative council, and voting procedures. State media says the restructuring was endorsed unopposed by the National People's Congress Standing Committee. A real-world U.S. study shows that Pfizer and Moderna's COVID-19 vaccines reduce risk of infection by 80%, 2 weeks or more after the first of two shots. Here in Pakistan, the virus has infected more than 4,000 people and claimed 100 lives overnight. The nationwide death toll has risen to 14,300. Globally, there are 2.79 million fatalities and 127 million cases. Australia has imposed sanctions on a Russian individual and 4 Russian companies over the construction of the Crimean Bridge. Foreign Minister Maris Payne says the bridge is an attempt to consolidate Russia's control of the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula. She said the move is consistent with actions taken by the UK and the EU. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. We begin in Myanmar, where the death toll from the military's crackdown on pro-democracy protesters has crossed 500. This comes after security forces killed another 14 civilians on Monday. Activists across the country have launched a civil disobedience campaign to hurl garbage onto the streets. Myanmar's advisory council has labeled the military as a terrorist group that should face international court. In a joint statement, 3 armed ethnic groups are calling for the military to stop killing protesters and resolve political issues. They warned they will join other ethnic groups for Myanmar's Spring Revolution to defend themselves. In another development, the UN Security Council will be meeting on Wednesday to discuss the situation in Myanmar. France has also decried the blind and deadly violence in Myanmar. China has approved a sweeping overhaul of Hong Kong's electoral system. The reforms concern the method for selection of Hong Kong's chief executive, its legislative council, and voting procedures. State media says the restructuring was endorsed unopposed by the National People's Congress Standing Committee. President Xi Jinping signed the orders to promulgate the amended annexes. The reforms authorize Hong Kong's electoral committee to pick 40 representatives of the city's legislature. Under the reforms, 20 representatives will be directly elected to the city's legislature. The size of the electoral committee will also be increased from 1,200 to 1,500. Now, a U.S. study shows that Pfizer and Moderna's COVID-19 vaccines reduce the risk of infection by 80%, 2 weeks or more after the first of two shots. Globally, there are more than 2.79 million fatalities and over 127 million cases. More on the pandemic in this report.
The world is ramping up political efforts against the COVID-19 pandemic in what is hoped to be the last wave of the outbreak. Canada is set to stop offering AstraZeneca vaccine to people under the age of 55 and require a new analysis of the shot's benefits and risks. Meanwhile, the United States says its experts will review the WHO report on the virus origins to ensure that the investigation was independent and technically sound. While President Joe Biden announced 90% of adults in the U.S. will be eligible to get a vaccine by the 19th of April. He also urged the states to pause reopening efforts. Data shows that the country's cases have been spiking for the second week in a row, as top health officials warn of impending doom.
I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope, but right now I'm scared. I know what it's like as a physician to stand in that patient room, gowned, gloved, masked, shielded, and to be the last person to touch someone else's loved one because their loved one couldn't be there.
The World Health Organization and 23 states have backed the idea to create a treaty to help the world deal with future health emergencies. Meanwhile, Turkey has imposed tighter measures due to rising cases, and Austria's capital, Vienna, announced plans to extend an Easter lockdown. Over in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson hopes the country will not need to go into another lockdown, but says he does not yet know how strong its defences against future waves will be.
What we don't know is exactly how strong our fortifications now are, how robust our defences are against another wave. And we've seen what's been happening. That's why I stress what's happening with our European friends, because historically, at least, there's been a time lag, and then we've had a wave ourselves.
Japan's health minister has apologized after his staffers violated COVID-19 protocols. Meanwhile, Australia's Queensland state has reported 8 new local cases a day after announcing a 3-day lockdown in Brisbane.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded a steep rise in COVID-19 mortalities in the past 24 hours. The health ministry reported 100 new deaths overnight, the highest number of the third wave. Pakistan has so far recorded 14,356 deaths since the pandemic began. More than 4,000 people tested positive for the 6th consecutive day. The virus has infected over 663,000 people countrywide, of which more than 600,000 have recovered. At the moment, there are nearly 49,000 active cases in the country, and the country's positivity rate has slipped to 8.82%. Meanwhile, Punjab Health Minister Yasmin Rashid says Pakistan will receive another 7 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine in April. And at the 9th Heart of Asia Istanbul Process Ministerial Conference in Dushanbe, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Makhdoom Shah Mahmood Qureshi will deliver Islamabad's position on regional issues today. The Foreign Office says Qureshi will highlight Pakistan's positive contributions to the Afghan peace process. He is expected to hold talks with key regional and international partners on the sidelines of the conference. Qureshi is also scheduled to have bilateral engagements with the Tajik leadership and hold talks with Foreign Minister Sirajuddin Muhyiddin. Talking to media ahead of the session, Qureshi said Pakistan has played a key role in convincing the world that no military solution can achieve sustainable peace. Australia has imposed sanctions on a Russian and 4 Russian companies over the construction of the Crimean Bridge. Foreign Minister Maris Payne says the bridge is an attempt to consolidate Russia's control of the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula. Payne asserted that Australia continues to support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. She said the move is in coordination with Canada and consistent with actions taken by the UK and the EU. Payne added Australia has maintained sanctions against Russia since it illegally annexed Crimea and Sevastopol in 2014. She said the new listings bring the total to 168 individuals and 52 entities. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. does not seek to contain or keep China down, but aims to uphold the international rules-based system. Washington's top diplomat made the remarks at a virtual briefing to foreign reporters. Blinken said the relationship between Washington and Beijing is not one-dimensional, but rather complicated. He said it is competitive, collaborative, and adversarial all at the same time. Blinken reiterated the U.S. stance on the need to engage China from a position of strength. Moving on, the U.S. says it is committed to multilateralism and has a profound stake in engaging in the United Nations. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made these remarks in a virtual meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Blinken said Washington aims to strengthen the founding principles and values of the United Nations. He said no problems or challenges can be dealt by any country acting alone, even if it is the United States. The Secretary added the United Nations is where countries come together to work on common challenges. Guterres said he welcomes new U.S. initiatives to support multilateral responses to global challenges. The UN Secretary General urged Washington to play a leading role in drawing up a global vaccination plan to beat COVID-19. Guterres called for stepped-up diplomatic efforts for peace as famine is destroying lives in at least 6 countries. Israeli police have shot dead a 33-year-old Arab man with special needs. They accused him of attempting to stab a police officer in central Haifa city. Police say the victim was running around with a weapon when his mother called the cops to the scene for help. They say the officer felt that he was in immediate life-threatening danger, but the victim's family has denied the allegation and called the incident a cold-blooded murder. They say he did not have a knife and was running away from the cops. The family says the forensic report shows that the police shot 5 bullets, 3 of which hit the victim. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're back. In Mozambique, ISIS claims it has seized the control of the coastal town of PALMA after days of fighting with security forces. Mozambique's army said dozens of people were killed in a militant attack on PALMA yesterday. In a statement, the militant group claimed to have killed at least 55 people, including a number of soldiers. The group said it destroyed and took control of buildings, including factories and banks, and seized vehicles. Aid workers say tens of thousands of people may have fled the town. The total number of dead or missing following the attack remains unclear. Meanwhile, the U.S. has condemned the attack and vowed support for Mozambique in its fight against the terrorists. Now, France has reopened its embassy in Libya after a 7-year closure in another sign of gradual return of stability. French representatives have resumed operations behind a tall compound wall in a new building on the outskirts of Tripoli. Last week, President Emmanuel Macron announced the reopening after talks with the head of Libya's newly installed presidential council, Mohamed El-Manfi. Paris closed its embassy after evacuating French and British nationals as fighting broke out in Tripoli in 2014. Macron called for all foreign fighters' exit from Libya and said France and its European partners were united in backing the ceasefire. Libya's new unity government took office on the 16th of March, completing a smooth transition of power after a decade of violent chaos. In Venezuela, local mayors desperate for cash are levying hefty tax hikes and launching aggressive collection campaigns. This has prompted complaints from businesses struggling to stay afloat in an economy battered by the economic crisis and the pandemic. This report has the details.
If the ongoing clashes between the military and armed groups were not enough, the locals now have to face another issue. Bills for local taxes and municipal services have jumped to thousands of dollars per month. It is the latest chapter in President Nicolas Maduro's abrupt liberalization of the economy as the U.S. sanctions ushered in an end to generous subsidies.
With regard to cleaning fees, I think it is very expensive what they are charging apartments and premises. I'm a resident of Chacao and I also have a business here in Chacao. I think that cleaning fees are very expensive. I know that the service is good, but the cleaning service is excessively expensive. I would like them to have a restructuring of prices.
The tax issue has largely halted federal transfers of oil revenue to municipalities that had for decades kept local governments' covers full. It creates another challenge for businesses barely surviving hyperinflation and the country's 6th-year recession.
A pesar de los problemas que esto conlleva.
In addition to the problems of a dollarized economy, keeping a cleaning truck costs a lot of money. And then there's the simple fact of workers who are going through this economic situation, that they can move about. We know what the situation with public transport is like. With the metro, there's no cash. And for all cleaning vehicles to go out every day, and sometimes it is more than once a day, that street sweepers are out doing their job.
In some of the country's 335 municipalities, mayors are also authorizing concessionaries to increase rates for services. Earlier this year, Maduro said that mayors had to figure out how to finance municipal expenses to add salt to Venezuelans' wounds. He insisted that they must pay for public services that were for years heavily subsidized.
And now for the latest in the world of business. Most shares in the Asia Pacific are trading higher as investors monitor the economic impact of the third COVID-19 wave. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is leading the gains, jumping over 1%. Seoul's Kospi has gained over 1%, while stocks in mainland China have also ascended marginally. The Nikkei 225 in Japan edged up fractionally as well. However, the ASX 200 in Australia has shed nearly 1%. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.